Hey guys, Paul here. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about archetype power levels in Yu-Gi-Oh! And how I sort of view them, and also some interesting caveats with how strong an archetype is or isn't. Also why I think that it's not a coincidence that certain archetypes are just better than others. And then some stray latent thoughts just mixed in there as well. So yeah, lots to cover. Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetypes come in many forms, there's lots of them, and something that you commonly hear is this idea that, it's not fair that my favorite archetype didn't get support, or it's not fair that my favorite archetype isn't as strong as other archetypes. Why does Konami print all these overpowered archetypes? Why do they print these archetypes that they know are going to be really strong and really OP, and why do they have to why do they get to be better than the archetypes that I like? So I definitely agree that, it would be nice if every archetype could get the same amount of support and every archetype could be, equally viable, and it would just be like a perfect world. But I think that it's maybe actually for the best that it isn't quite like that. So obviously from Konami's point of view, I think it's sort of reasonable to assume that they want some archetypes to be stronger than others so that there can be sort of something to chase after. And so to that end, you can look at a lot of different, packs and new sets and products and stuff, and point to certain archetypes that just seem like they have been tuned a little bit, more than other themes in that set to be powerful and to be, played and stuff like that. So some recent examples I would say would be Sword Soul. It's one of those archetypes where you only have to look at it once to kind of recognize, yeah, this is going to be really strong. It's just kind of got all the markings of it, low commitment cards, lots of consistency, like a really linear, cohesive theme that just works without clunkiness. It doesn't have any awkward bits in it. I'd also say Fluanderies kind of fits that bill too, maybe to a lesser degree, but it's definitely been picking up in competitive popularity these days. But this isn't anything new. This has actually existed for a long time. If you take a look at a format that everybody kind of loves to hate, the Zodiac format. If you just look at Zodiacs and True Draco is another one of that time period, you can tell just one read of these cards that these were meant to be extremely strong, and Konami knew that these were going to be extremely strong. I would say that another sort of era where you could point to that might be Sky Strikers. It could be Thunder Dragons when that came out. You could kind of tell yeah, they have effects when they're banished, they have effects that you can discard, there's all this synergy. You can just tell when Konami wants a deck to be really good. And so basically these sit at the top of my mental tier list. I have sort of 3 tiers of decks and then a 4th miscellaneous one that we'll get into. But yeah, this is sort of the Konami intends this archetype to be a meta contender thing. It's not to say that it always works. Sometimes these decks don't actually end up exactly panning out, but oftentimes you can just tell there's just the signs there. You can tell by the rarities that the cards are printed in. In the Sword Soul example, they have 2, 3, 4 secret rares, then a couple ultra rares. So you can definitely sort of get the vibe. Then there's that middle tier, and this one is probably one of the more ambiguous tiers because you can't really say for sure, but in my notes that I've got here, I just kind of there's certain archetypes that they're a step above being kind of just extremely budget casual, not really meant to be great. And they're probably viable and playable, but maybe just not the best. So that's kind of where your Sulph Accords come in, Ogdoadic. What you might start to notice here is a lot of what I say is going to be these decks that come from deck builder packs. So I think of Evil Twins, and I think of just even generators or witchcrafters or infinitracks. Despite the fact that they're not super meta contender things, they seem to be very purpose built. They came at it with a theme that they usually, a strategy that they do, and they tend to do it consistently. And because they're in the deck builder sets, where pretty much all those cards come in those sets, you know that Konami had to design it to be playable out of the pack. That's not always the case with, main series archetypes. So that's kind of where these mid-tier ones fall. Some other examples though, and these get weird, but just bear with me. It might be something like Phantom Knights, which I think at the time of release were a good but not amazing deck. Now over time, that can of course change because, cards will get more cards, and they might also get new game mechanics might even help them out, or sort of off indirect support can change a lot. So I think like Phantom Knights might have started out as more of like one of these mid-tier decks. I'm going like mid, high, low. But yeah, like kind of as one of these mid-tier positions, and then like became more of a high-tier threat over time. Let's see, what's some other like very recent examples? I'd maybe throw like Despia, maybe B Troopers. That might be like some recent stuff that you could kind of toss into this category. I'd say that they're all here and that they're functional decks. They're just not like as good as the top tier ones. Then there's the low tier decks. Now I don't mean low in a negative sense. I want to be clear about this. I just mean that low in that like these tend to be the archetypes that are low rarity and oftentimes low entry point. So it's easy to pull all the cards you need. The strategies are usually straightforward enough, but they do tend to have a bit of clunkiness or just general limitations to their power level. There's an asterisk by all of this, and trust me, I'm gonna get into it. I know like as you're watching, you're probably thinking like, but, and I'll get there. But so some of the ones that I wrote down just for this were like Magic Keys, you know, kind of low rarity archetype. It's about ritual summoning and it's like, you know, normal monsters and stuff. So it's already kind of starting off a foot behind. Digital Bugs, that's like a personal favorite of mine, but I'd say like that's one. Sue Ships, Melfi, Mutant, Springins. These archetypes all tend to be like, you know, oh, and like Tenyi, which I know what you're thinking, I know, but hold that thought. Yeah, so these tend to be archetypes that are low rarity. They're very easy to pull from a set. It's kind of the stuff that you don't want to pull from the set, right? I would say like one that I kind of ended up building was like Dual Avatar. That's like a favorite of mine. So these tend to be easy to get, and because of their low power level, they're oftentimes really fun to play against each other, but pretty immediately you'll find yourself getting bullied by the upper tiers of decks. So I know what you've been thinking the whole time, and this is kind of the category where we get into that. This is the miscellaneous category. So a lot of weird stuff can go in here. This is kind of the category where it's like, the archetype might have been intended to be a low or mid-tier strategy, but ended up in a higher tier or ended up as an engine, or maybe was intended to be an engine from the start. So like for me, I put Invoked in this category. When Invoked came out, it certainly was just sort of I'd say a mid-tier strategy. Over time, it has become a lot stronger. And the thing is, though, it's oftentimes combined with other things. A pure, just raw Invoked deck technically it exists if you do like the whole Alistair with like a 15 hand traps thing, but it almost can't really function on its own and would be like a mid-tier thing at best. But when you combine it with, you know, like the current thing, I guess would be like Shaddoll and Dogmatica and DPE, suddenly it can be like a high-tier strategy. Another example that I put in here was like Tri-Brigade, something that I feel started off kind of as a mid-tier supplementary archetype. Supplementary in that like it almost seemed like it wasn't meant to just work alone. It meant to just be used in other decks, but this obviously changed as they got new support cards like Bearbrum, but also, you know, they were combined with things like Zodiacs for a while to make it really strong, or Lyrilusks to make that to make a stronger hybrid than the sum of its parts type of situation. Dogmatica is another one that kind of fits in this miscellaneous category. The Dogmatica deck is not fantastic, right? Like Alec actually tried to make like a pure Dogmatica deck. It's nothing special, but the Dogmatica engine, that's to say, you know, Nadir's Servant and Ecclesia and like Fleur-de-Lis, Punishment, which is really that's a standalone staple, but works pretty well in the engine too, suddenly is quite strong and can add a lot of power and sort of defensive options to a deck, but still it's hard to place Dogmatica itself. And even among the like deck builder sets, which I oftentimes cite as being like middle of the road decks that are, you know, linear and pretty simple and kind of not overly strong, but also not so weak that they can't compete, you've got some weird outliers. This is sort of where your Eldritch comes in, which I think was maybe just a little bit more overtuned than the rest. But then also something like, say, Drytron, which I think Drytron played pure is just a mid-tier strategy, but it's almost begging to be used in other ritual strategies. In fact, I actually would say this reminds me a lot of like Megalith, a strategy that as standalone cards, just the Megalith deck, they're pretty low rarity cards and they have pretty low power levels, but when used with other ritual cards can quickly become very overwhelming and can help a lot with consistency and speed for another ritual archetype. So it's weird. And then I guess the very big elephant in the room here would be the Brave engine, which is just like, the Brave deck is not really anything special, but the Brave engine is literally carrying, a lot of the metagame right now. And it's hard to even say, like, does that make the Brave archetype good? Well, seemingly not, but it seems like the Brave engine is a top tier engine. So I don't really know. I guess to wrap it all up, I would just say that Konami seems to have design choices that are definitely in mind, and you can just tell by how they print the archetypes, how quickly they print all the cards, what rarity they print the cards in, even maybe what they release around the time that the rarities work. Oh, and yeah, to quickly cover the Tenyi example too, Tenyi is definitely something that, like, on their own are a pretty low tier strat. The Tenyi support cards aren't fantastic and the monsters aren't great, but, because they're worms and because they can summon themselves and then a few of them have, like, other really useful effects, they work really well with Sword Soul, but until Sword Soul came out, Tenyi wasn't, fantastic, though they were Tecton things. So I don't want this to come across as like, this is Paul's definitive tier list of like what's good, what's mid, and what's bad. It's not. It's just more like, this is kind of how I generally think Konami maybe sees it, and things don't always go according to their plans. So I want to hear from you guys in the comments. What do do you have like a mental sort of like power levels where you place decks, and how does that change when you add in different engines, and how does that change when certain staple cards kind of come into the picture, and the extra deck and stuff, which is such a big thing, because like any low tier deck can still access Code Talker you, or it could still hit you with Boral Sword, it could still make Warlord Savage or Apollosa, or it could still throw in DPE. So yeah, this is not like me saying this is a perfect tier list or anything like that. It's just sort of how I view power levels, and honestly, it's a bit of a mess. So yeah, let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd love to hear it. And let me know any other topics you want me to talk about. I've actually been trying to get a few more user suggestions for like topics, concerns, interests, hot takes to cover on this channel, and maybe make these a more fun, interactive experience between the both of us. Be cool. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.